Hello, this one's going to be a bit of a longer video. If you're interested, stick around. If not, maybe scroll on. I just posted a video about the pension cap. The pension cap's likely to be indexed up for superannuation from $1.7 million to $1.9 million as of the 1st of July. In that video, it was a short, sharp video, but there was a lot of terminology that I spoke about, and someone commented on there saying, can you explain some of this terminology? Not many of us understand it, which is perfectly fine. I get it. So that's what this video is going to be about. We're going to have to go back a bit to explain superannuation and how some of this terminology comes about. It's going to be a longer video, as I said. Stick around if you're interested. So the first thing that we're going to need to understand is the basics of the accumulation style of superannuation. So the accumulation style of superannuation is where you're contributing to your balance, you're growing your balance up in anticipation of retirement at some point in the future. So the accumulation side of super looks like this. If you think of super as a bucket, money gets into super one of two ways. As part of your wages, or you make your own voluntary salary sacrifice. If you're self-employed, you might be making personal concessional contributions. There's money goes in pre-tax on this side. There's a limit on this side, annual limit of $27,500, and you can make those types of contributions right through until you're 67. After 67, you need to meet something called the work test. The work test means that you do 40 hours worth of gainful employment over a 30-day period. If you're over the age of 67, you need to satisfy this thing called the work test. Then you can make these types of contributions right through until you're 75. So there's some age limits and there's a dollar limit of putting money in on the pre-tax basis. Over on the right-hand side here, you can put some of your own money into super. This is what's called a non-concessional contribution. So think of that as your own money. It's cash that you'll have in the bank, shares, bits and pieces like that, that you will have already paid tax on that money somewhere, somehow, for it to end up in your bank account. And you can contribute currently up to $110,000 per annum, or you can group together the current year plus the next couple of years and put in up to $330,000 in one go. This money goes into superannuation. There's different taxes on each side. So this non-concessional or your own money here on the right-hand side, when you're contributing that to super, there's no tax when that money goes in. That's, I guess, allowance for the fact that you will have paid tax on this money for it to end up in your bank account in the first place. On the left-hand side here, there's a tax when that money is contributed to superannuation at 15%. If you earn more than $250,000 a year, this will be taxed at 30% instead. So it's either going to be 15 or 30 depending on your income. Now, as your balance is growing up, the returns that you earn on your superannuation fund are also taxed. So the increase in the growth of the property or the shares that you have, that's not taxed unless it's sold and there's a capital gain. But the rent that you receive, the dividends on your shares, the interest on your bank accounts and term deposits, those kind of things are taxed at 15%. Capital gains, if the asset's been owned for more than a year, are taxed at 10%. So whilst there's different taxes going on here, tax on the money being contributed in the first place, tax on the investment earnings, these tax rates are typically far less than what a full-time working person would be paying anyway. And if you're a low-income earner, there is some concessions around these tax rates here. You might get some rebates and effectively not be paying any tax on these types of contributions anyway. Now, back to this $1.7 million cap, likely soon to become $1.9 million. That impacts things over here on the right-hand side. Once your balance gets to 1.7 million, it's called a total super balance. Once you get to $1.7 million in total super, you are unable to make any more of these contributions here on the right-hand side. Now, what's likely to happen from the 1st of July is this cap is going to go up to $1.9 million. So all of a sudden, people that were capped out because they were at $1.7 million and couldn't make any of these contributions, if they're above $1.7 million but below $1.9 million, they are going to be able to make some of these contributions. Depending on how high their balance is, they may or may not have access to this 330, but there's likely to be able to be some type of contributions being made on this right-hand side. So now if we talk about the pension side of superannuation, that first one up the top there that you can still see is the accumulation side. This is the pension side. So once you reach something called preservation age, you can start to access your superannuation benefits in the form of a pension. Now, if you're retired and you're accessing what's called a retirement phase pension, there's a cap on how much money you can have in your pension in the first place. The current cap on that is $1.7 million. Now, Some people will say that's really high, I'm not anywhere near that. That's okay. There are also a lot of people that have far more than $1.7 million in superannuation. Once you start a pension, if you're over the age of 60, the money that you take out is tax-free. If you also satisfy a retirement condition, there's tax-free earnings on your $1.7 million. Anything above $1.7 million can stay in superannuation, but that will be stuck on the accumulation side, where the earnings on that are still taxed at somewhere between 10 and 15%, as I was explaining before. Now, with the indexing up of this pension cap, this $1.7 million is likely to go to $1.9 million. So if you're sitting there with $1.75 million in an accumulation fund right now, and you were considering retirement, it may be worthwhile seeking some advice about whether you should or you shouldn't do that, because if we do see an indexing up of this cap to 1.9 million, rather than having 1.7 million here and a little bit of money left over here, you might actually be able to have everything in the tax-free pension side. So that's the basics of the accumulation style side of superannuation and the pension side of superannuation. Whilst I say basic, I can appreciate that that is incredibly complex and there's a lot going on. What I want to take you through now is some real world examples of what tends to happen with people in their 60s and 70s when they're getting some inheritance, when they're thinking about estate planning for their family, and the advantage, I guess, that this increasing of these caps up to $1.9 million will have for a lot of people. If we go back to this accumulation diagram for a minute and we talk a little bit more about these contributions on the right-hand side here, I was explaining the $1.7 million cap likely to become 1.9 and open the door to more contributions here. So what we tend to see in reality in the financial advice that we're putting together for clients and what we've been doing over time is that there's three major events that people are trying to contemplate later in life, often post age 60. So the first one is inheritance. In my experience, in the years that I've been doing this, a lot of people tend to receive their inheritance probably sometime around there in their 50s or 60s. That's right around the time that you're probably reaching peak superannuation balances. Now, you might not be anywhere near 1.7 million, that's okay, but maybe you are. And so the increasing up of this cap will allow people that receive some money via inheritance that little bit later in life, they'll be able to contribute money into here under this cap, whereas before, if they were at $1.7 million, they would have been capped out. The second one is downsizing. It's fairly common for us to see clients at some point in their 60s look to downsize. Now, sometimes they're moving from a big house to a smaller house that actually costs exactly the same money as what they sold the big house for, so there's not necessarily any money left over. But sometimes there is. They might be going from a big house to a smaller house and there's a whole lot of money left over. So there is access to something called downsizing rules, which is $300,000 per person. If there's two of you, you can put in up to $600,000. You can continue to make these types of contributions regardless of if you're at 1.7, 1.9 million and beyond. This cap here does not have any influence on whether you can make these downsizing contributions. But from time to time, we're doing work for clients where they've got more money left over from downsizing than what the downsizing rules actually allow them to contribute. So we might be doing 300 per person, so it might be a couple, for example, we might be putting 600,000 into superannuation, and then we're also trying to make non-concessional contributions, which is these ones here on the right-hand side, and these caps can sometimes get in the way depending on the balance that someone might already have. And then the third one here is around estate planning. The estate planning piece, I've gone back to this pension diagram to explain what happens here. So you've got your pension fund, you're operating that, you're drawing your tax-free pensions out, that's fine. But upon your death, if this money is to go to an adult beneficiary, typically children, adult child that is no longer dependent on you, they're likely to have to pay some tax on the benefits that they inherit from your superannuation fund. Your superannuation benefits are made up of two components, what's called a taxable component and a tax-free component. How this money ended up on taxable or tax-free sides of this component is all to do with how the money got into the superannuation fund in the first place. But for the purposes of this part of the conversation, the tax-free element of your benefit that is paid to adult beneficiary children goes to them tax-free, so zero tax. But the taxable component, if that's left directly to them via the superannuation fund, they're going to pay 17% tax on that. If it's left to them via your will instead, they'll pay 15%. The difference is the Medicare levy. If the superannuation benefits are left directly to your child, they have to pay Medicare. If it goes via the will instead, they only have to pay 15%. But regardless, there's some tax to pay on inheriting money from superannuation. So one of the strategies that we're really commonly implementing for clients is once they get to this age 60, they've started a pension, they've got full access to their superannuation benefits, what we're typically doing is we're getting them to take big lump sums of superannuation out. We might be taking $330,000 out in one go. They take this money out as a lump sum or a pension payment, however they take it out, but that's going to be tax free out to the person whose pension that is. Then we use this money to go back to this one here to make these non-concessional contributions on the right hand side where we stick money back into superannuation. Now in the beginning that has to go to accumulation, we then roll it over to a pension fund, but this taking money out and putting it back in again as a non-concessional contribution switches these components around. It takes money from this taxable side and moves it to the tax-free side. So we have done work for many clients over the years where we've switched over $1 million or more worth of taxable money to tax-free money. Now it takes years to do that. You can't do it all in one go. 330,000 every 3 years. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some planning. But because of the indexing up of this cap to $1.9 million, we'll now be able to do a fair bit more of this than what we have been able to do otherwise. Now the final piece that I want to explain is how the indexing up of your pension cap happens. So if you have already started a pension for less than $1.7 million, if this pension cap does go up to $1.9 million, your cap will increase up, but you won't get it all the way up to 1.9 million. It's done on a proportional basis. Again, it's easiest if I explain with a diagram, but yeah, here goes. So if you thought what I was explaining before was complicated, get a load of this. So the way the indexing up of the cap works, not everyone will get the full indexing up of $200,000. So if you at some point started a pension with $800,000, at that time the pension cap was 1.7 million. So the way this works is you've used 47% of the cap. 800,000 divided by 1.7 million is 47%. You've used up 47% of the cap. You have an unused proportion of the cap of 53%. So anytime the cap is indexed up, as we're talking about now, being indexed up by $200,000, you get 53% of the indexing up, which is $106,000. So your pension cap then becomes 1.806 million. It's not the 1.9. Whereas if you wait until the cap has increased up to 1.9 million, well then you get all of it because you didn't have a pension, you hadn't started a pension back then, you haven't triggered a pension, you get the full indexing up, you get the full $1.9 million cap. If you still had that same $800,000 in super that you started a pension with, you've now only started a pension using 42% of the cap, you have an unused proportion of the cap at 58%, so any further indexing up of the cap above 1.9 million, you'll get 58% of that rather than 53 over here. Whilst it looks like small numbers, it makes a difference. It can be really inconvenient if you end up being capped out, inheritance, lotto winning, downsizing, all the rest of it. There's things that happen over the years, and if you can maximize your cap, if you can have access to more of it, you're likely going to be better off. So if you've come this far and you're still watching, thank you. This is a far longer video than I would normally put together. This is a really complicated topic. As you can see, much longer and much more detail required than just a 1.5 minute video like my previous one. Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. And if you like these longer detailed stuff, let me know. I can try and do a few more of them. I've probably forgotten some bits and pieces in here, so if you do pick up something, by all means drop it in the comments and I'll try and interact with you. But yeah, this is me just trying to think of stuff off the top of my head, draw some diagrams, explain some things. Hopefully that's of value to you. All the best. Bye.